Greetings, Marsh here, and welcome to episode 179 of my modded Factorio playthrough. In this episode, we're going to continue to expand our new bus here. And we have some choices about what to do about this, but I'm thinking, since we have these big electric motors, we should probably give bots a real hard look. Mainly because many design choices we can do with our new bus here would significantly change if we had access to bots. Certainly could make things a lot less complicated when it comes to belts. So I'm thinking we probably should focus on bots, especially now that we have the motors, we have the last element necessary. That's kind of a normal thing in Factorio, where whenever you can make bots, you should make bots, because it makes life a lot easier. You certainly can rely on them too much, but nonetheless, they make life easy. So let's take a look and probably do all this research to get an idea of other things we're going to need to have on the bus, because the bots need to self-replicate themselves for them to be truly useful. So in that sense, it should be one of the first things that's on the bus, basically. But we have most of these things. We're not making batteries on this bus because I think we decided that batteries is more of an intermediate that should be done elsewhere, because it uses lead and plastic, which have limited uses. So it keeps this bus cleaner by not doing it here. So that's something we're going to need to work on. And the attack drones and whatnot are similar. But let's also take it to robotics 2 as well, because we're going to need flying frame 2s for robots. And similar to how we're skipping tier 3 of the assemblers, we're going to skip tier 1 of robots. Again, because of this motor change. I'm thinking that big electric motors used to be blue science, and then they were recently switched, and now that's suddenly why this seems very odd to me. Is that it used to be blue science and now it's not, which makes sense because it really shouldn't have been blue science if it was, but I just find it hard to believe that I just skipped this the whole time, but it's possible. But that requires aluminum and white circuits and more batteries. These are all things that we have. So we can grab that. And now we need to do the individual components here to make construction robots. We need one of those flying frames, and a brain, and a tool. The brain is an electronics component. So that's another reason why we have the electronics bus, because that requires the mid-tier of circuit board. So it's not the finished white circuit board, but the mid-tier of it. So that's certainly something that isn't really being transported and makes sense to be manufactured at circuits. And then we can just send the brains down on like a drone or something. And the robot tools are a lot simpler, just steel plates and gears. So that's something that can be made locally here to make construction robots. And we can do the storage chest with white circuits as well. Let's also take a look at logistics bots. Requires the flying frame, but then the logistics robot brain and tool. The recipe is the same for the logistics brain and the tool, they're just different items. And of course that unlocks character logistics, which I am very excited to have, as well as the passive provider and the requester chest. All things we can use. And now that we have all of those technologies, we can go into Robot 2, and it's all kind of combined. Where to make a Logistics Robot 2, we need the Tier 1 of the bot, plus the Tier 2 of the frame, the brain, and the tool. The Tier 2 brains are very similar to the first tier, just requires more parts, but the same type of circuit board, which is kind of odd. It makes me think that the balance still needs to be tweaked a little bit here, because even though Tier 1 robots are green science, you still need white circuits, which is almost blue science level of technology. And the construction brain is the same, and the tools now require aluminum, brass, and steel bearings. And these are all things that we can make. And Tier 3 robots is purple science, so we can't really do that. Certainly can do some robot upgrades. But let's keep going down. I changed a setting. You see if I can find it actually, so I'm not just referring to it. So in Bob's Logistics, I have the setting here to disable roboparts. So in other words, the vanilla game roboparts do not exist with this setting enabled. So it forces you to use all of the modular components. And the modular components are interesting. But if you are using Bob's mods, there's kind of no point to use the vanilla machines, although you'll be very tempted to use them if you can. So that's why I have that set like that. So the way the modular roboparts work is that each individual function is its own item that you place on the ground. So a robo chest is where the robots go to park when they're not doing anything. It has a very limited supply and construction area and can only charge one bot at a time. Requires steel chest and then some of these modular components. A roboport array, hatch door, and charging pad. The array is a white circuit item that just requires a lot of stuff, and you see it gets expensive. 25 brown circuits and 5 regular circuits. Like, that's a lot of parts that go into this one thing. So they get expensive, and that makes sense because they're powerful. And then a charging pad, which is more basic components here. And a door, which uses concrete and lots of motors. And that's essentially what you would call the vanilla game roboport. But it has very limited functions. So if you want extra functions, you have extra items that you need to place on the ground. So you expand the logistics by using these expanders here, which requires 3 of these antennas. And that's kind of what's neat about that, is they have their individual parts, which don't do anything, but they do go into the bigger item. So it kind of makes it a little more interesting, where instead of just random parts, it's 3 arrays and 5 steel plates, and that makes sense. And that'll expand the zone. And then you also have a choice of these charging points. The regular sized one, which requires 4 charging pads, and will thus give you 4 charging slots. Or the bigger one that will give you 9. And there's also this logistics zone interface. It's for hooking up to the circuit network to determine, like, for example, how many bots are flying around in the logistics network and that kind of thing. So we can grab that, and then we can check out tier 2 as well. So we can upgrade our robo chest with aluminum plates, the first chest, and lots of parts here. Where the door requires Invar, brass, and steel, so that's one of the few things that does need Invar, so we're good to have it now. And then the charging pad, which is also Invar, and batteries, and the array, which is aluminum. And these other parts basically require aluminum, the first tier of the item, and then whatever of the second tier thing they need. So you can see how there's lots of parts going around with this. The big thing is the logistics zone expander. So the construction area is 120 by 120 with tier 2. But with tier 1, it's only 60 by 60. So since that's in a square, that's requires 4 of these tier 1s to do the same area as a tier 2. So certainly they get quite powerful as you level up here. And we definitely want that. And that's it for the basic robot parts. Of course, there's combat robots and robot upgrades and whatnot. But these are all the technologies we need. So now we kind of need to look at making sure that we've got all of the other components necessary. Well, one thing we don't have on the bus yet is steel bearings. So we'll want to make those. And we need to make those batteries somewhere, probably in what we will call the intermediates bus. Just making random things that are otherwise difficult to make and don't use common items. We're already delivering concrete, which is good. We'll need to make these robot brains, 1 of each. We'll need to make the construction tier 1, logistics tier 1, and then construction and logistics tier 2. But the recipes are all basically the same, it's just it's going to have to be made on the electronics bus and sent down here. And that's basically that. So, steel bearings, batteries, and the brains. Another thing to consider that we might want to put on a bus here is pipes. So iron pipes go into quite a bit. These other ones less so, but they do go into some stuff, like brass pipes and whatnot. But the problem with pipes is that things that need pipes tend to need a lot of pipes. So like an oil gas separator needs 30 pipes. So do we really want to put that on a bus, considering it's like a 1-to-1 ratio here? And that's kind of bad, considering that a lot of this stuff is made from coils. So it is significantly more efficient to send the coils around. So one thing we can do is make all of the pipe items at the same location. So instead of having pipes go down this bus and take up belts, we can just consolidate all of the things that use pipes and then make them there, which is probably a better use of those. So the last thing on the bus we need to worry about is steel bearings. And how many of these do we want to make? Well, I guess it depends on how much goes into stuff. You can see it's quite a bit. So we might want to focus on just making a whole bunch of bearings, or 30 of them. And now things are going to change because we have 2 more tiers worth of assembling machines. So let's set it to assembly machine 4 and see what we can do. Well, it only takes 3.75 of them to make 30 a second, but that changes when you use lots of productivity modules. But still not that many machines considering the output, and like before, and anything that uses 4 modules, at least with productivity module 2s, is once we hit negative 80% speed, that's the maximum reduction it can be. So you can see we're at 14.43 machines and we use 1 more, and now it requires 13.4. So productivity modules get pretty strong when you stack a bunch of them together. So this is going to require a bunch of steel bearings. And it seems like it's pretty close to direct insertion here, to the point where we might as well just do direct insertion, so we're not moving all these balls around. And then that has its requirement of 20 plates. So we chop those up from coils. And of course do it very efficiently. 1 to 6 is kind of an odd ratio. Can't easily do that. I'm sure there's ways to do it, but I don't think I want to bother. So we'll just have the 5 machines on the top making the belt of steel. And now unfortunately we've got some handcrafting in front of us. Well, there we have logistics. And this menu got a lot more complicated. Well, we'll worry about that later. Luckily, all the things that we need for making these assemblers are right here, so... There we go. Hopefully 50 of them is good enough. So the input goes in, and then it goes out. Making our steel, we might as well just do 6 so it's symmetrical. And all of that robot research is already done. Oh, there's certainly more robot stuff we could work on. Let's not worry about that for now, because we're doing pretty good. Then we'll have our steel output. So this is at a 1-to-1 ratio. First the steel balls, and then the bearings are there. And the output of the balls is very significant. We need a stack inserter for that. Then steel goes in, steel goes in. To make it look a little cleaner, probably want to put this stuff on the other side, but also kind of noticing that we're going to have quite a few of these machines, so maybe putting all 6 of these down here doesn't quite work. Because this is basically the square they're going to have to be in. And this is only 2 sets of machines. That's 4, 6. And that would be kind of tall. So let's change the ratio here. Or compute this, and we say, do them in 2 sets of 8. So we need about 3 machines. But we can just do 4. Let's get some power in here so we can make sure everything's set right. Okay. And that is 16 machines. But It's half and half, so it's 8. So we'll want to double this up. I don't know how long our nanobots will last, but we'll give it a shot here. So I want to line it up with 2 spaces. And we can share the belt right there. Just watch the nanobots go. Another silver warning, but how are we doing? Oh, look at that. No more silver plate requests, just silver wire. So we probably just need to build up a buffer here. And then finally, the silver will be caught up. Okay, let's see how this works. Need the modules in here though. Starting to use quite a few of them. It's a good thing we built up our module production like we did. Looks like they didn't quite max out here. I mean, it seems alright. Certainly produced quite a few of them very quickly. And now we have steel bearings. It's kind of funny how they overlap a little bit like that, but I guess all things kind of do in Factorio. Building an intermediates bus is probably the most complicated element of this, even though it's just going to be for batteries for now. Nonetheless, we're still going to have to build a new bus somewhere. For now, let's worry about those brains. It's kind of funny that they're called that. Probably want to do the combat brains while we're here. So we can build a defender out of flying robots. The combat brain, which is a brown circuit, which makes more sense than it being the higher tier. And it's got its weapons. And we can do the second tier as well, which will let us build a distractor. Don't plan on building them right now, but we might as well make the brains in case we need them for later. That'll require military 3. Give us the combat shotgun. The sniper rifle, which is interesting. The damage isn't very good, but the range is really long. And it's extremely efficient with your ammo. So might as well. That way we can do these other robot brains. So we'll just grab that. Fortunately, there's the transport drones recipes kind of mixed in here, making this a little more complicated. You see between these 2 tiers, the only difference is more components. But otherwise, it's basically the same thing. And they don't go into each other, which is important to note. We'll have to show the disabled ones to get access to combat brains. So they're all very similar except for that first tier of combat. Let's see. We cannot do the electronics assembling machine 3. I mean, the 2s are certainly very good, but we can't upgrade there. So now the kind of the question is how many brains do we need to make? Let's go forward here. Let's see what the limiting factor is when it comes to making robots. It's probably the big electric motors, because the brains are relatively easy to make, the tools are relatively easy to make, and these other components are as well. I mean, certainly we could run out of white circuits pretty quick if we made a bunch of these. But I'm guessing it's actually going to be the big electric motors. So let's find out what the maximum output is. So we need the tier 2. Let's also throw the tier 1 in there because we know robots would need both of those tiers to work properly. And let's say about 5 of each. Oh, that's way too many. Because yeah, our whole setup does 7. So actually doing 1 per second is probably pretty safe here. And it doesn't get too nuts with anything else. I mean, they are robots. It's not like we need to make them super fast or anything like that. They will build up over time as required. We got lots of robot parts here. But each robot requires a frame, a brain, a tool, and the previous tier if there is one. And it's all 1-to-1 ratio here. So, at maximum, we basically can only make 1 robot a second. So that's all we need to worry about for these brains here, is 1 a second for each. And could probably make this much simpler because the recipes basically are copies of each other. I mean, kind of. Unfortunately, like you look here, each one of these requires a slightly different combination of parts. I mean, the recipes are the same, but yeah, probably need to do them one at a time here just because it's not quite a copy and paste thing. But luckily, they use productivity modules. So of course we want to use a bunch of them. So the setups become modest in size. I notice we're running pretty low on tin ore here. Just want to make sure there's no backups. Yeah, it's running at full power here. It looks like we've got a big shortage on stereotype here. And it's running at full power. It's all getting used to make copper and other things. Yeah, and it's shut off here because we just don't have very much of it. So this is just an output thing. We're using 100% of the resources that are available to us. And it's just... Tin got the short stick there, so it's filling up last. But otherwise, it's working properly. So we'll need to grab all the necessary parts. And probably consider if we're going to expand this bus or turn it or whatnot. We probably will want to turn it. I guess it depends on how big these machines are. We'll have to see. There is a little bit of space here, but we don't want to take up too much because we'll need enough room for every existing belt to probably turn right. And it's kind of annoying because we have tracks there. Or we can make them turn left and go down here, but that space is a little more narrow. Yeah, turning buses is always undesirable. We'll have to see how big the setup is. I don't think it's going to be that big because it's just 72 electronics machines and they're relatively small, so we don't have too much to worry about here. The tier 1 and the tier 2s are all similar to each other, just a different number of inserters and whatnot, but we can have something that is fairly copyable here. So it's 8 machines. Tier 1 and Tier 2 all kind of require very similar numbers here. And we can fit 4 of these in a row with the power poles. We're not making very much of it, so we probably can share the belt with other items. But we'll have 2 belts of input and then an output. Let's just say these are the Tier 1 construction brains. They won't let us flip it, so we gotta do it ourselves. And then we can do the tier 2s. But we need twice as many machines. And that's really not that long of a setup, so we can just go straight down here. Okay, well, one thing we can do is flip this around, because this is the orientation it's going to be on the bus. Well, I kind of don't want to do separate inserter settings for every single one, but looking at these numbers, they're all so slow. I think 1 yellow inserter for each one regardless will be just fine. Then we will output to one side of this belt, something like this, and then it will be copyable, or we can do this. We'll plop it there. We'll plop it there as well. Probably going to find that we have too many poles in here. Well, not really. They kind of have to be there. Then we can set these to the other robot brain types. Logistic brain 1. Logistic brain 2. Combat brain 1. And combat brain 2. And then we'll need to deliver all of the solder for this whole thing, and since it's combined, it can be done right here. But with productivities, we're going to need to have 2 machines here. Something like this. So our output will be kind of weird. But this one belt here will have these brains, the tier 1s, and then these brains, the tier 2s. This one will be combined here. And this belt will combine later. So we'll have 3 total belts of the individual brain types. Not for throughput reasons, just because we have that many items. And then we'll probably send them straight across the bus here, like right down here, to get loaded on drones. And then those drones can take them the rest of the way. It's really not that far away, but since the other drones are here, we'll probably want to take them down here, deliver them by drone, and then they'll all come in here. Although, having them on the bus would be kind of weird if we only need them to make a few things. So actually, it might be better to like have the drones just take them right here. And in fact, that is almost a short enough distance where we wouldn't want to bother. How big is this setup anyway? That's not too bad. It would look like this. So it would fit in there pretty well. But we don't really want to have a huge long belt of items because we just don't want to have that much stuff sitting around not getting used. So it actually might be worth having a drone path come up through the bus here, much closer to where it's being made. Probably want to bring some drone path. I never bring enough. So we'll see how that works. It's probably still not going to be enough, but let's just make a nice copy, although there's no lights in here. No aluminum. Well, that's aluminum plate, and we're not shipping aluminum plate anymore. That is because this warehouse got a little low, but there's still aluminum in there. So we'll still want to leave it connected until it runs out before we convert it to coils, but we probably want to go up there and turn off the request so it's not constantly beeping at us. And hey, look at that. No more silver requests, so silver officially caught up. So if we just get rid of that, then we won't have any more beeping. And machine gun robots. Let's turn off the aluminum request for now. But that's been cleared up. We'll let it run out. It might take quite a while. A lot of modules before that needs to get adjusted again. Okay. This is a good spot for the brains. Coming up to a Jivolite patch there. But not quite blocking it yet. Let's see. The spacing of this is going to be a little weird because this belt here. It should still work for most things. So we got all the machines aligned. Let's see, we don't need these extra poles here. And then where do we want to build this road? Probably like right over here. Let's see, kind of want to put it up here, but not quite block the resources. So it would be like right here. And then it can go besides this train track here. And that should leave enough room for the bus to make a turn if it needs to. It probably will, unfortunately. And actually, since the belts are pretty short, we won't have to worry about these belts combining or anything. They'll just go up to their necessary supply depot with a rider. We connect those here. We want to fill this up if it's got less than 600 brains. We'll have to get all these brains set up correctly. It's so weird they're called brains. I feel like it should be zombies or something, but these are not zombies, not even robot zombies. So 600 is the size of a drone, so we'll do that. So if it's less than 600, it turns on, and then the enabled condition is equal to or greater than 600. And then one of these will also exist right here. Except this time it's the tier 1 with the green brains here. So many robot parts to deal with. And then we've got these two in the middle, which is a little more complicated. And we can use some corner inserters, although they do need to be the filter variety. There we go. And we need the rider on here, but it's a little more complicated. We need these two here as well. So our input's going to be Combat 1 and Logistics 2. So this one will be Combat 1. This is Logistics 2. And then the enabled condition is the associated item is less than 600. And then what these will do is look to see if we've got the equal to or greater than required number. If so, green square. Kind of easy to get all these mixed up, so you have to pay close attention. There we go. And the green wire for the output going into the writer, which is looking for 2 green squares to turn it on. And with all of that, that should have that set up. And we kind of need the same thing right here. For some reason, the cables don't copy over, but this is tier 1 and this is the green tier 2, and that should be all of that configured. I guess we'd find out, and there's no request for any of this right now, so it's not like it's going to go anywhere. We can come all the way back here to get access to these unfinished white circuits. Which we then can extend way out here. Probably gonna run out of belts real fast. And it looks like they'll just barely make it. Finally, the circuit boards got here. So those get distributed, although if I recall, one of these doesn't use the white ones. So that's gonna be a little annoying. I wasn't thinking of that. So it's gonna be not quite so symmetrical. Maybe we can have an input going right there for the oddball circuit. That's going to require changing this stuff here. So we've got the solder coils. Doesn't seem to be quite fast enough, but it could be that it doesn't really matter because we don't need them to run at full speed here. So we'll see how it works. And then both of the electronics components need to come in here. Oh yeah, it just occurred to me that electronics components are not being bussed right now. So it's not something that can just be inserted in here. Well, that's okay. We can just do it locally and then send them in. Does mean we probably could have done the solder up top here. So in that sense, the position of all this might change a bit. So that was a bit of an oversight there. Well, our factory can only produce 1 robot a second. So we need to look at the worst case scenario here. Well, for electronics components, it looks like these green brains here use the most. And then for transistors, it looks like it's the orange ones. So let's make about 15 a second of the resistors. Probably won't require too much as far as machines are concerned. A few. And then the transistors, probably like 7.5. So we got to get this all set up. Transistors are a little more complicated, but not as much now that we have silver wire on coils. I could kind of copy existing setups, but since we have access to newer, faster machines and modules as well, it's probably better just to build a fresh one here. Okay, kind of time to start slowly hooking everything up and see what happens. So let's check our basic components. Production. So it'll start distributing those. So you might get slightly better performance making this red since it's pretty much exactly 15. It's mostly green here. And the components are getting distributed. Let's let it catch up first, because this is only enough components for one of these colors to run at any given time, because that's all the factory is really going to need for one robot a second. We can actually test each one of these individually by cutting off their supply of components here. But I imagine if one works, they'll all work, 'cause they're all basically the same thing. So let's check the green brains. Production rate is quite slow. Let's see how this needs to go down. Another square. And there's the brains. Slowly working their way up the line. See, the solder's just taking forever to get up there. Well, it's slightly more than half of a belt, so it probably just needs to be red here. Yeah, that definitely helped. See, those ones aren't running because we need basically a bunch of electronics components, so this whole thing needs to be red. Yeah, now it looks like the resistors are making it to the bottom. Mostly. Not quite all the way, but good enough. Since all of this won't be able to run at the same time anyway, it should be okay. So since that seems pretty good, we probably can just hook the rest of it up here and let it run at whatever speed it's going to run at. Whoops. I hooked that up to the wrong thing. It's got to go that way. Well, making lots of brain types. And each type will get loaded up in their associated warehouse. So we'll probably just need to give this some time and check it later to make sure it stopped and it wasn't just constantly making components. So the last thing we needed is a bunch of batteries. But that's going to have to wait until the next episode. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you later.